the introduction of what is research proposal and why we want to go with this research proposal. And yesterday in the keynote address that Kavin Nasar also mentioned, what are the basic elements of the research proposal. So moreover, for the different types of grants, either it may be in the small research proposal, the basic elements may be slightly varied. And the main focus here I am going to discuss how to start with an introduction and how to collect a literature review, what are the various sources for collecting the literature review, and what do you mean by the preliminary data, and why should we submit a preliminary data while submitting a research proposal, and what to be submitted, and what is the importance of this preliminary data. And finally, the summary of these three things. So to put a brief definition of what is research proposal, so we all know that a research proposal is a type of a document, a formal document, where it explains what you are going to plan to the research and why it's worth in researching and how will you do it. So the three things here are to be considered: what, why, and how. So this should be explained to plan your research while you're performing your research and how you're going to perform to complete it. So the various questions to be asked and steps to be taken, and what are the basic elements of these steps. So the first question was writing a research proposal. So we are going to select the problem. What is the problem? We have to select the statement of the problem. It may be any, for example, in the case of your pharmacy, we may go with any invention of a new drug or a different type of a formulation, or in the case of the pharmacology, we may targeting any disease with a particular pathway where it is been not done before. So the first question is asked, what is the problem and why it should be studied. So the steps section, you have to select the statement of the problem, and the elements is what is the problem to be identified, and we have to give the prioritization and justification why we have selected this problem, how we are going to practice it. So once you identify the problem and statement of the problem, then we are going to see what is the information which is available, that is, which is already available. So we call it as literature review. So how far we are going to collect the literature review, and what are the various search engines and databases are available for collecting this. So you call it as sources or reviewing. So once collecting all this literature review information, then based on the previous theory, we go, why do we conduct this research and what is the achievement of this research. So for that we go for the formulating the aim and objectives. So going to the aim and objectives, we may have a primary objective, or we may have a secondary objective, and we can also give a graphical structure of the hypothesis, why we have to go for this problem. Next comes, how are we going to carry out this research, and what are the data to be collected, and from where to collect this data and the information. So that you call the part as a research methodology. So it may vary from the type of the grant or the type of the work we carry. So we call it as the variables, the type of research, the data collection techniques, the sampling, the data analysis, the process, and how are you going to plan that process of data, and next, how are you going to interpret it with the proper statistical analysis. And the next question is asked, who will collect and when is going to collect. So for that, you call it as a work plan. And normally we would like to have a personnel or the manpower, what we call it as the JRF or SRF, and what is the timetable we are going to do it. And how this work which is being carried out according to the methodology is being monitored, and how the research findings will be used. So like these questions will be asked. So is there any research administration plan, and how are you going to identify this, monitor this administration, and what are the identification of this potential issues? So this will play also an important role, how it is being monitored. And next, the question is asked, what and how much resources are needed, who will provide the resources. So this plays an important role. Nowadays, if you see, most of the institutions and most of the scientists, they apply for the grant, and based upon the budget, you may see that the most important thing, the funding organization. Here you can see the three M's, that is the man, materials, and money. And how are you going to collect this fund? How are you going to raise this fund? So this plays an important role in the sustainability of the scientists in an organization also. And who will submit, how to submit, where to submit. So first you have to prepare a proposal and then try to use by the researcher and proposal presentation by the proposal, and there is an appropriate authority for this presentation techniques. So these are some of the questions to be asked before we start writing a project or a research proposal or before writing the introduction. So once keeping these questions in the mind, we can follow the steps and make the elements of the step. So therefore, why we require a research proposal, as I mentioned, it is a formal document generally proposing a research project. So the research project may be at the PhD level, or you may apply for the grant from the external organization. Generally, it is for the basic sciences or for the academia. Sometimes you may apply with the joint with the industry also. So generally, we can say it is a document which is a request for a sponsorship for that research. So whatever we are trying to execute the research, we want a sponsorship. So that is the thing we are going to apply a research proposal. And then, what are the things we are going to evaluate in the research proposal? The most important thing is the cost and the potential impact of the proposed research. So what is the potential impact of the proposed research? Then we have to convince the reviewers who are going to review the proposal. And we should also evaluate the soundness of the proposed plan for carrying it out. So therefore, for these things to be evaluated, the few key points are considered to be important. The most thing is the research questions. What we have discussed, some of the questions previously, as I showed generally. So the research questions will be addressed, and how they will be addressed to be known, and how much time. The time plays an important role. So normally you see a research proposal may be given from 2 to 3 years based on the research question. And what is the budget, that is the expense will be required for that particular research. And the other most thing is the priorities given the research done on the topic. So whether the topic is related with the current, whether it is a hot topic or it is a sustainable topic, or whether it is viable. So all those things are also considered to be important. And how these results of the research will be evaluated. And the other most important thing is how the research will benefit the sponsoring organization and the other parties. So nowadays, you know, that is from the bench to the market. Whatever the research proposal we are going to take, they're saying it should come out in the form of a patent and it should be available in the market. So that's the thing what they're expecting and nowadays. So therefore, this research proposal may deal with ideas for a researcher about what research she wants to do. In a simple terms, we say what is the objectives and methodology she has to set, and how much time the resources are required to complete it, and how the research finding are to be reported. So this is all are dealt with the research, the scientist, the PA who she's been involved. And sometimes it may be an individual or a research institute formal offer. Sometimes you know that they may produce a product or render service to a client in response to a request from the client. Or you may call it as a work plan, a prospects outline and statement of intent ahead. So finally we can say in short, she is proposing a framework for completing the research. So we can say it is a work frame. So like this, we can speak a lot about what is a research proposal, what are the questions to be asked, how we are going to complete this work frame, and what are the requirements. And generally we see what are the basic elements of this research proposal. These may be some of the basic elements. It may be a small grant or a large grant. It may start with the title, an introduction, what we are going to discuss, either maybe the background of the problem or the statement of the problem, and why we have selected this problem. So, proper rationale, justification, and significance of the research, and what is the scope and the limitations of the study, the review of literature, the objectives of the research. Sometimes, whenever it's needed, then we give the operational definition terms and the hypothesis. I think the remaining topics will be covered with the next speakers. The methodology, the budget, the organization of the report, bibliography, references, conclusion, appendix. It goes like that.
So, Dr. Vadivalan, anything problem?
Yeah, so just a minute, because here there is a current.
Okay. Slides.
Current. Just 2 minutes. Yeah. Just a minute. Yeah, is it audible, sir, now? Is it visible, sir?
Yeah, it's visible and audible.
Sorry for the interruption. It was a small current also. So these are the basic elements of the research proposal. And for me, what was the target is given to speak about the introduction and review of literature and the preliminary data. So these were the 3 tasks given to me. If you go for a structure of research proposal, there are different ways how it is being proposed in different grants, but generally these are all the basic elements where it has to be discussed. And before writing the research proposal, as I mentioned in the first slide, what, why, and how we are going to do it. So before we start it, we should have a sufficient information about the topic, what we are going to discuss, and we should know all the research questions and what are the key elements to be done. So therefore, it will be easy for us to write a research proposal in a proper way. So the 3 important building blocks of a research proposal is, first one is the research problem. We should know what I said in the first slide, the statement, and we have to give the justification, and then how we are going to design the research, and finally the contribution to the knowledge. So these 3 are called the 3 building blocks of the research proposal. And before going to the introduction, one of the author has commented that there are some 10 key ingredients for the implementing the research proposal. So however, I'm not going to go in detail. So just to say what are the proposal ingredients as per the author's information. So what is the gap or the quality gap? So whenever we selecting the proposal, we should know what is the gap and what is the significance impact on that particular literature in which we are going to collect it. And the evidence-based treatment to be implemented. So it may be a significant information. And the conceptual mode on and theoretical justification. So sometimes it may be useful to give a clear conceptual theory or a framework model. So here we can say it's an approach innovation. And the fourth one, you can say the stakeholder priorities, engagement in the change. So this plays an important role. Whenever we are going with the research proposal, what is the priority of the stakeholders? And setting a readiness to adopt new services or a treatment or program. So this may be an impact approach environment review criteria. And the implementation strategy process and the team experience with setting the treatment implementation process, the feasibility of the proposed research design and methods, the measurement of analysis section, and is there any policy or funding environment leverage to support the sustaining change. So the sustainability is also considered to be important. So these are some 10 key ingredients before we are going to write a process, see that whether we can know whether anything can be implemented here. So coming to my topic, while writing an introduction, imagine you are just writing the introduction for the first time and writing a first research project. The first thing we have to spare more time to collect the information, the literature, and to know what is the problem we are going to write and which is the priority to be given. So the first thing in writing the introduction, what is the major research problem today which is existing nationally and globally? We should know what is the problem. And then next, we should know the topic which is related to that problem. So normally when we are researching the topic, it should not be very vague or not informative. So it should be short, precise, and it should give an exact information. And then what methods must be used to analyze the research problems? So we cannot give all the methods. So the methods which are particularly related with the topic, so that should be given. And then we should be able to mention why this research is important, what is its significance, and why care about the outcomes of the study. So always whenever we are going to design work and stating the problem, the outcome of the study, the benefit, the knowledge to the globe is always considered to be important. So these paragraphs, the related information should be focused mainly on the introduction. And sometimes we also include in the introduction the background of the study. Keep suppose sometimes in some of the grants, in the introduction itself, they may ask into subheadings, what is the purpose, what is the background, what is the rationale. Sometimes they may ask the objectives of the study in the introduction itself. So we should be able to write about the research area, what we are going to write. So for example, specifically you will be asked if you are interested in any neurodegenerative disorders, such as Parkinson's or Alzheimer's, or in the case of the diabetes mellitus, we should be able to know about the particular area, the current, the present scenario about the topic, the epidemiologic status of the topic, what are the drugs available in the topic, who all are working in that particular area. So all those information should be known. That's what we mentioned, the present scenario about the topic. And if the research is about an industry, we should be kindly be more specific about that particular industry, what we are going to perform. And definitely we should elaborate on the key statistics evidence. So we should provide this evidence. So all the background of the study is also considered important while writing the information. So therefore, the main purpose of this introduction is to provide the necessary background or the context of the research problem. So that's what I told you in the first research question. And definitely it's going to be a biggest problem while we are framing the research problem in proposal writing. So that's what I mentioned. Whenever we are selecting the context for the research question, the topic what we select, it should be the hot area or the older area that remains viable. So if you see the past 2 years, if you see the most of the journals or most of the proposals, it's dealing with the current scenario. I think it is related with the COVID-19. So sometimes it will be related with the topic which is a need for the globe for the treatment or for the diagnosis or for the prevention case. So it's the case of COVID-19. And secondly, you must need to provide a brief but appropriate historical backdrop. That's what I told you in the previous slide. So we should know the basic things about it. And thirdly, we should provide the contemporary context in which your proposed research question occupies the central stage. And try to identify the key players and often refer to the most relevant and representative publications. So that's another most important. Briefly, if you want to share when you're writing an introduction, you should try to paint your research question in broad brushes at the same time bringing out its significance also. So the introduction should be polished based upon the background, the research problem, the current area, and the context and the key players. So these are some of which covers the following elements. As I mentioned, it may vary from grant to grant. However, you have to state the research problem which is offered as purpose of the study, why we are going to do it, and set the stage for your research question in such a way as to show its necessity and its importance. And as I mentioned, rationale of your proposed study, and what are the major issues and sub-problems, and identify the variables, either key independent or dependent. Then try to hypothesis, you state your hypothesis or theory, and always set the delimitation of the boundaries of your proposed research. So because always you should try to have a clear focus. If required, the definitions of the key concept also can be given. So generally, when you put your introduction, you say what is the need of this study. So that is about an introduction. So normally when you're going for an introduction, you see that you know the topic, whatever you have selected to the current trend, and it is viable. And generally you go for the background of the study. What is the statement of the problem? And you have to give the proper research context, that is the question. And then what is the rationale behind selecting it? You have to give the justification of selecting it and try to have the evidence key statistics. So this much information generally you should be mentioned in the introduction. So for writing introduction itself, you should have a thorough knowledge on whatever the topic we have selected. So for that, we should have a proper literature review. The main purpose of the literature review, I think we all know that whenever we just type in the Google, we collect all the information. And sometimes, there are different search engines and different databases. Some are open and some we have to pay for collecting it. So there are plenty of information exactly related with your topic, what you can collect and how you can collect it. So therefore, coming to the purpose of the literature review, so all research, whatever the discipline needs to be situated in relation, that is the work which has been already done in that field. So normally we collect the information which is already available from the sources which is there, and the method of collecting and what we are collecting and what is the duration of the period we are collecting, so that we can avoid some of the duplicate, or we can make up the theory. Sometimes you call it as systemic review also. In medical terms, they work on it. So that may be useful in the case of a literature review. So therefore, this reviewing the literature will generally help you to find out what is already known about a topic in order to locate the gaps. So that's what initially I think. So what is the gap which is being not studied? So locating the gap in the literature review will give you a proper information to put your research questions and give your hypothesis. That's what we said, and it may justify the research being undertaken. You may locate the work of important theorists whose ideas will inform the research. So this will be helpful you to identify the useful methodologies, the methods, and the documentary source. So there is a process of literature review. So one of the author is quoted some six process while writing a literature review or when you're going to prepare. First thing, you define your research question exactly. What is the inclusion and what is the exclusion? What you want to add in your literature review? What you want to remove from your literature review? So that is the first important thing. Define your research question. So exactly what you want, it can be included. And second thing is identify the relevant search terms. So blindly we cannot enter the 3 or 4 words or a sentence as such to find the whatever we require. So there is a particular scoping searches terms in related reviews. There are specific we can say databases are available for the relevant information what we would like to collect. And then develop your research plan. Next thing is, so try to combine the terms with and, or as phrases. And sometimes they say apply a truncation or a wild cards also to collect the information. So you'll see what is the truncation and wild cards. And then the fourth process is test and refine your search. So that is most important to refining the search. Check results are the key articles, and always you try to apply limits or filters. So normally if you go for the different database, so we may filter based upon whether you want a lengthy article or you want for the particular years or what exactly that is the pathway is being studied. So it is based upon how we are going to refine it and applying the limits and filters. And select the relevant databases and run searches. You know, there are plenty of search engines. You know, in India itself, there are so many things are available. So the best what we use is Google search. But exactly going for the database, you know, the most two important followed one is the Scopus and Web of Science. Other than that, there are some other databases are also available. We should know how we are going to utilize this. And finally, how you are going to manage the document and search results, how you are going to save such some software, you know that like EndNote may be used where it can be stored. So therefore, first you try to define your research question, try to identify the relevant search terms, develop your search plan, test and refine your search, select relevant database and run search, and document and manage search results. So we all know that nowadays it's not only for college, even small children who are studying LKG, UKG, without going to the school itself, they know how to search the search engine and collect the information. If you see, we call some as a search engine and the other one you call it as a database. So normally the most commonly used search engine for literature study is Google. So it may come under the dilemma whether it comes as a search engine or research database. However, there are more information also available. We can see what is their advantages and disadvantages. So other than that, you know, the MSN, Microsoft, Bing, Ask, like that, there are so many search engines are also available. And if you see the research database, I have highlighted only 8. The most which is being used is the Scope of Science and Web of Science. These are the two most important things which is being used worldwide. So other than that, you're having the PubMed, ERIC, and mainly for the engineering, that is IE Explore and Science Direct. And so it is not open access sometimes for a particular journal, and DOG, Directory of Open Access Journals, and JSTOR. So what is the difference between this search engine and the database? So if you see the search engine which you're collecting directly from the internet source, the materials from numerous sources. So not only from one source, they may have from all these sources what we have discussed. Either it may be the individuals or from the government. And the search engines must work with material prepared without regard to the specific software. The quality of material varies here. They generally do not access for profit information. Sometimes the content often anonymous and undated. But if you're going for the database, you know that it is usually created by only a single publisher, and normally it will be pre-arranged for easy searching the content. Either it may be the year-wise or by the country-wise or maybe the disease-wise. And the quality control by the editorial staff, it is always controlled. And most are available only to the subscribers. So this plays a role where you have to pay for it. But however, some of them are also available, and the sources are usually identified and dated. That's most important. And these databases are often focus on specific subject or discipline, but some cover several areas also. So before we plan to search a literature review, we should have an idea what are the search engines and what are the databases available and exactly what we want. So the first thing I said, what to be included and what to be excluded in our literature review, we should first try to know it. And sometimes, as you said, you have to go with the truncation and the wide call. So this is one of the examples. Truncation is a symbol which is used at the end of the word to find the variations of the stem. So for example, you can search educate and use any symbol. You can retrieve all these things such as education, educated. So exactly what we want, we can take it. For example, the wild card also, whom we can put a question mark. It retrieves the woman, woman. So what is the necessary? For example, you can see the realization, how they introduce the word here and what are the necessary things in it. So sometimes we may ask the database help icon which information, which symbol to use it. So instead of blindly searching, we should have a proper way how we can search and how we can refine it. And if you see all these databases, as I mentioned to you, I'll just give an introduction, because whenever a person is going to write a new research, so you should have an idea of collecting exactly what is the information about this database. So Scopus is one of the most biggest commercial bibliographic database, where it covers almost all disciplines. And normally here they make you the academic journal rankings, author profiles, and H-index calculator. So all are from USA, and the provider is from the elsewhere. So it is a multi-discipline. Web of Science, you also call it as Web of Knowledge. It is the second big bibliographic database. It is also from the provider Collaborate. Formerly, you call it as Thomson Reuters. And here also you can see it is the discipline is multi-discipline. And PubMed is one of the source of anything for a literature in medicine or biological sciences. More specifically, so that's what the National Institute of Health, USA, is the provider. The discipline is medicine, biological sciences. So we should have a brief idea what are these databases and what is their importance. From these databases, exactly what we will be able to collect. So if you see that most of the databases are from US, the ERIC is also that is the Education Resource Information Center from US Department of Education. It is related with the education science. Then mostly we go with the science director also to collect all the journals, full length article journals and ebooks. For some it is free and some we have to go for subscription. So this also provider is the elsewhere. So like that, so many databases are there. So what are the relevant databases that are required for us? So we may choose the option. So as I told you, what is the difference between a literature review and a systemic review? The systemic review, it goes further one step than the literature review, and it aims to locate and evaluate all studies published and unpublished relevant to a specific research question. So sometimes it may explicit the systemic methods to minimize the bias and enable the verification and replication. So normally for the systemic review, there is a separate library, the software which is using. It's the Cochrane library. It's often considered to be gold standard. So mainly it is used in the case of the medical information. for the better health. So that is called as systemic review. That means already the work has been carried, published, so they will be relevant to a specific question. So this may be helpful to minimize the bias and to enable verification and replication. So therefore, to say literature review ensures that you are not reinventing the wheel. You are not reinventing the wheel. That's what I said. Our work has been already previously carried out, and you no need once again to do this work. So that's what. Before we going for the problem statement, we should know whether this problem statement has been previously addressed to the globe. If it is addressed, in what ways they have been addressed, what is the new approach that is now an approach where we are going to address. So give credit to those who have laid the groundwork for your research. So we quote them in our reference. And it demonstrates your knowledge of the research problem. So you will be having a thorough knowledge once you read this based on the problem statement. So it will help you to demonstrate the understanding of the theoretical and research issues related with your research question. And it shows your ability to critically evaluate relevant literature information. It indicates your ability to integrate and synthesize the existing literature. How we are going to integrate and how we are going to form the new thing. And this will helpful for you to provide a new theoretical insight. That means which has been not done by referring to the previous literature. It develops a new model as a conceptual framework for your research. And definitely, while planning such type of or designing or refining a proper literature review, will convince the reader, the reviewer, that the proposed research will make a significant and substantial contribution to the literature. That's what I said initially. We should resolve the important theoretical issue or filling a major gap in the literature. We should try to fill the major gap. So what are the key points to be known finally for a literature review? You know that when we are seeing for medical education, this forms the basis for a high quality medical education research and helps to maximize the relevance, the originality, the generalizability, and the impact. Therefore, it provides context, informs the methodology, maximizes the innovation, avoids duplicate research, and ensures that the professional standards are met. And these literature reviews take time. So you have to take time, and it should be iterative. And the purpose of should continue throughout the research process. The researchers should maximize the use of the human resources, the librarians, colleagues. So you have to go for discussion. That's what I showed some of the databases and search engines and the related articles. So it should be keeping organized in a critical way. And in another literature, one of the authors pointed out some 5 C's should be taken to an account while writing the literature review. Cite, compare, contrast, critique the literature, and then connect. So the cite means we have to keep the primary focus on the literature pertaining to the research problem. Compare, so the various arguments, the theories, methodologies, and findings which is expressed in the literature, which is approaching to the analyzing the research problem. And contrast, so all these things, controversies, the methodologies, and what about the agreement, disagreement, or the debate related with it. So you should have a critique the literature, whether the argument which is being made is persuasive and why, and which approach the finding methodology seem most reliable, and pay attention to the verbs you use to describe what an author says, does, asserts, or demonstrates. Finally, you connect it. So the literature to your own area of research and investigation. How does your own work drop on, depart from, or synthesize what has been said in the literature? So try to follow these 5 C's while writing reviewing a literature. So that is about the literature, the second part which we have discussed. So we should know that this literature review the work which is been already done by a scientist or the researchers, the methodology in which he adopted, and what is the innovation he has done. So therefore, we can go to a new innovation, and mainly we can avoid the unnecessary manpower, we can avoid the duplicative research. So we can see that we spend we maintain a professional standards are being met. So we have to see work with all the search engine and database and try to follow the 5 C's to make a proper literature, where this may convince the reviewer to know what is really the impact, the high standard of successful the research proposal is being written. And sometimes after writing the literature review, we may write a specific objective also, more precise objective sometimes. They should be called as SMART. That is, it should be the objective, whatever you're writing should be specific, measurable, achievable. It should be realistic. Sometimes we call the term relevant also. So realistic is most appropriate, and time framed or time based. So they say we have to follow this SMART process while writing this objective. And normally, sometimes it may be organized in hierarchies. You may have a primary, secondary, or exploratory, or sometimes simply general or specific. So one example is given here. Primary objective to evaluate the safety and tolerability of a single oral dose of a compound in normal volunteers. So this may be a primary objective. The secondary objective may be based on that. What we are going to assess from that? We are going to assess the PK profile of the compound X from the single dose. And sometimes the exploratory objective. What is the incidence of the peripheral edema reported to as an adverse effect? So it is based upon the grant. We may choose the SMART objectives. It is considered to be important. So what is the SMART objective? As I mentioned, it should be more specific. Who, what, where, when, why, which. So you should try to define your goal as much as possible with no ambiguous language. And measurable. It should be always measurable from and to, when and where. Can you track the progress and measure the outcome? For example, how much, how many, how will I know when my goal is accomplished? And whether it is attainable. Is the goal reasonable enough to accomplish? How so? Whether you are able to make sure that your goal is not reach out or below standard performance, and relevance, a reliable, what I mentioned, worthwhile to meet your needs. And finally, the timely. When are you going to achieve your objective? Your objective should include the time. I will complete this work by this and this. So it makes a sense when you're going with the time. So therefore, while writing your objectives, you consider this SMART thing. So here you can see some of the good and bad examples which you have collected from literature. For example, you can see a title. It is related with the diabetes. You know, the diabetes, they are associated with some anxiety and depression. So anxiety, depression, and diabetes. It is too brief and this is not informative. Study of the role of anxiety and the depression in onset of diabetes in interior regions of some particular place, a prospective study. Here it is, if you see here, it is not concise and it contains unnecessary words. And you see informative, concise, not too long. For example, a title, a prospective study of the role of anxiety and the depression in onset of type 2 diabetes. So this is one of the, you can say, one of the title which is giving information concise, which is not too long. So like that, so many research questions also can be asked for a good question. You can see, do the diabetic patients with major depression are more likely to have a higher cardiovascular risk factor? So you can see here it is related with the healthcare feasible and clear. So we cannot put a question, does smoking contribute to heart disease in diabetic patients? So it is something a weak scientific value. And a research hypothesis, some examples, elevated level of inflammatory mediators is associated with major depression in diabetic patients. So this is a good hypothesis based on several inflammatory mediators. It predicts the development of type 2 diabetes, may have a role in the biology of major depression, or any hypothesis not based on scientific evidence considered as a weak hypothesis. So you should try to give a good, relevant, informative, concise title, which is feasible and clear research question, and also the hypothesis. So based on that, you can go for this example, you can go for a strong and specific objective. For the case of the type 2 diabetes associated with anxiety and depression, assess the cardiovascular factors in patients with type 2 diabetes. Objective 2 may be measure the depression levels in patients with type 2 diabetes and associate the depression level with cardiac risk factors. Measure the inflammatory mediators, like that interleukin 1 to 6 in type 2 diabetes, and how we are going to correlate the level of these inflammatory mediators with this depression. So whatever the objective we are going to give, it should be strong and also should be relevant, and it should be more specific. So that is about the literature review, and then the objectives with a good and bad example. And the last thing what we are discussing is about the preliminary data. So most of the grants, if you see, it may be rejected or it may not be accepted where we are not able to provide the preliminary data. So before applying a grant, see that we are having a preliminary data which has been already done in our institute, and the preliminary data may support for you for a large data to be set, and this may be useful for the reviewer to see what has been done. So therefore, this preliminary data will be important, and sometimes it may be asked in some grants, and sometimes it may not be asked. However, if you're having a preliminary data, it is an added advantage. So therefore, preliminary data, the data generated from small-scale research projects to evaluate the feasibility prior to conducting full research studies. It can also be combined with the data from full research the project to generate a larger data set. Anything you start with a small scale, then you go for a bigger scale. So including this preliminary data in your research proposal would give you an added advantage. And you can see a small peek into the research methods or the instruments and the exploratory findings. So it may take the positive way when a reviewers peek into your preliminary data. And always in having a preliminary data, you see how far it is having the credibility. You call the credibility cycle to be followed. It's considered to be one of the important, because you may get a better outcome and result. And when there is a reduced credibility, then automatically the cycle of the overcommitment and the underperformance, it will diminish authority. So therefore, always a credibility cycle should be followed whenever we are following this preliminary data. And definitely your application will bolster with strong preliminary data to demonstrate two key factors. One is the approach, that is your proposed result is promising, because you have already got a data. So when you're going with a bigger scale, it is going to having the promising. The feasibility, so that means it can be carried out in a larger way. The ability to carry out is credible. That's what I said, the reproducibility of the scientific way. So therefore, this solid preliminary data may provide added information that will enable the reviewers to evaluate the proposed studies favorably. And some grant types, as I told you, may not require preliminary data, but still if you have this preliminary data, still it can help you. So the question is asked is, how much preliminary data are you going to provide? How much is that is enough? So that is entirely reliable upon the scientist or the PI, the researcher, how much to include, whatever the information he has got. The information should convince them to have a proposed project that accomplished to high impact. So it should have a high impact, and it should have a paradigm shifting your hypothesis to lay a solid foundation to your proposed project. And initial findings are always surprising to include more data to convince reviewers that the results are real, replicable, and statistically significant. So that is the importance of providing the preliminary data. And definitely, if you have a sufficient amount of preliminary data, it may convince the reviewers that the project has highly likelihood of the success. So the path is to the leading to the success way. And to evaluate both the merit of your proposed studies and your skills as a scientist. Also, this preliminary data is important. As I told you, the next is whether it is necessary. We know that it may vary based upon the type of grant or the fellowship or the cooperative agreement or the project grant. Generally, when you're going for a small grant mechanisms, this preliminary grant may not be necessary. But however, if you see the most applicants include the primary data, those who do typically enjoy the greater success rate. And normally it should be impactful, so likely to accomplish it fully. And you know the critical assessment of the published research explaining where and why your additional work is needed. So the preliminary data may be necessary in those cases, and it may evidence that it helps you to justify the proposed so this way or that way or the other way. How you're going to carry the work, it can be justified when you're having the preliminary data. And the next question is asked, should I include much preliminary data as possible? So always use the word, you stay focused. Don't unnecessarily put you in trouble by including the unwanted data or not necessary data which you're not going to justify. So including rigorous preliminary data which is directly related and try to justify your specific aims. Always share the past research outcomes to establish your expertise with a method or a model system. As I told you, don't include the irrelevant information in effort to impress reviewers with your productivity. So this is what we may think we may be giving a huge information, but if it is irrelevant, it's not useful. And that's what I'm saying, we have to share the past research outcomes and then focus. And always you know that the preliminary data will be judged and considered to the scoring for your grant. And the question is, what kind of data should I provide? So normally the applicants, they ask for the quantitative data as primary. So the quantitative data may be numerical, such as if you go in for the clinical sites of work, age, height, weight, income, like that. However, sometimes the qualitative data may also be equally important to know the gender, religion, status, marital, social class, like that. And sometimes whenever you're giving this data, instead of giving in a stories or in the form of a table column, so they say always you go in a graphical abstract or use a figure to illustrate your ability to perform a new technique. So here you can see a plant extract where it is being isolated with a new compound and it is acting on some receptors in vitro, and then they've seen it's inhibiting the synthesis by in silico, and they're planning it for an anti-cancer activity. So it should be in form of a graphical abstract illustration method where it will be easy for the reviewer to know it. And also the information, the flowchart, the diagrams, it should support the sensitivity, specificity, and reproducibility of your technique. So that is most important. And data are often only valuable as a method used to generate them. Anything that reflects your research skills and methods can help. So generally this data will help the reviewers to assess your ability to interrupt your findings, which is especially important for new investigators. So nowadays if you see most of the journals, they may ask the graphical abstract initially to know what is being done in the entire work. So finally, coming to the summary, so that to say that I have given the three topics: the introduction, the literature review, the preliminary data, where I have tried to focus generally what has to be included, what has to be excluded, what are the various, you can say, the search engines and databases, what is the importance of the preliminary data. I have given in a general way. We have not taken any topic to be included. So general things to be known based upon the area of research interest, what is the current problem, what is the research topic, and we can go for writing this research proposal on these topics. So what are the do's and don'ts, do nots to be in a research proposal while writing these gradings? So always while preparing, you try to produce a professional looking proposal, try to make it interesting, make it informative and meaningful, write easy way to read. That's what I say, it should not be vague or irrelevant. You exactly present the content in the page As I told in the case of introduction, sometimes we may present in the headings and clear subheadings. Sometimes they may ask the national and international status also in the introduction. And always see that it is very concise and precise. And you check the spelling and grammar. I think nowadays, there are various methods to check the grammar, and you cannot just cut, copy, paste from the previous researchers. We are responsible for checking if the plagiarism is there or not, and therefore it should be present in accurate or acceptable format. Do not is that use no word which first of all you do not understand. The word which you do not understand, please don't put it or try to know it and then you include it. And use of difficult word or unimpressive to the readers of the superficial or authority. So you should not use the irrelevant or the unimpressive words. So as per my knowledge, these are some of the do's and don'ts on my experience. So thank you.
Thank you, Dr. MC.
Thank you so much, sir.
Yeah.
Now the session is open for questions. If you have any question, you can type it in the chat box or you can unmute and talk to the professionals. Dear delegates, if you have any questions, you can type it in the chat box or you can unmute and talk to the delegate, talk to the speaker.
So to add one more 2 points, that is about the usage of the words. And then, so dear faculty members, be careful not to use the word like extraordinary, very important, it is a must, it is potential studies. Those kind of words I always insist, as he rightly said, you have to be careful. An introduction is the one which is going to tell whether your work is okay or not. If it is not being represented correctly, then definitely they are not going to read, they are not going to take it further. So it's one of the most important point you should always remember. One minute.
Thank you so much for your informative session, sir.
Thank you. Thank you. I thank the beloved principal and my professor, Dr. Ramanathan sir, once again giving me this opportunity to share whatever I have learned from you and in this my career. And definitely whatever you are giving, the advice is taken by all as a senior person in our pharmacology field. Once again, I thank you all the organizing committee and the members.
Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Vadivel, for your time spent, and we are hope we'll be interactive in other sessions also. Thank you so much.
Sure, thank you.
Dear delegates, take a short break for 10 minutes and join at 11:20 with the same link.